Hello everyone and welcome to Split Second. This week we received Sogan as a special thank you for supporting the show on Patreon for 1 year now. He brought his Urza Polymorph deck, while he's once again trying his Jan Jansen combo deck. David is piloting Kinan's House of Mirrors from Pongo, and Rodrigo is trying out Tasha the Witch Queen. Sogan is going first and he kept his first 7 with plenty of juice. Snow-covered Island, Polluted Delta and Tolaria West for lands, with an early Sol Ring for ramp. Torpor Orb is great against Docksides and other stuff like Gilded Drake. We'll have to wait to be cast after Urza though. Flusterstorm and Tail's End are good interaction. Bal also kept his first 7 with a Marsh Flats and Arid Mesa for lands. Mox Opal has no current Metalcraft, but Ashnod's Transmogrant can help with that, as well as achieve his game-ending combo with Clock of Omens. Drannith Magistrate is the main reason to keep this hand, as well as having drop potential from Ogma and a tutor for Dockside in Imperial Recruiter. David also found a quite decent first 7, Scalding Tarn and Snow-covered Forest for lands with a Lotus Petal, Mana Vault and Elvish Mystic for ramp. With Kinan out, he can generate enough mana to threaten a win as early as turn 3, due to Tezzeret the Seeker and shared summons. Finally, Rodrigo unfortunately had to mulligan down to 6, not wanting to go lower. Polluted Delta, Underground River and Misty Rainforest for lands, with Dothy Voidwalker and Nashi for some added value. Toxic Deluge can clear the board if needed and he sent an island to the bottom. Ready for the match? Sogan starts the game with a Polluted Delta and cracks it for a snow-covered island. He casts a Sol Ring and follows it with a top-decked Lotus Petal before passing. Bal plays a Marsh Flats and cracks it for a Plateau. He then casts a top-decked Esper Sentinel and follows it with a Mox Opal, ending his turn. David plays a Scalding Tarn and cracks it for a Tropical Island. He then casts a Lotus Petal, triggering the Sentinel and not paying, so he can cast an Elvish Mystic and passes. Rodrigo plays a Misty Rainforest and just passes. Sogan gets to his turn, plays another snow-covered island and casts his commander, Urza, entering and creating a construct. He passes with his interaction up. Bal draws, plays an Arid Mesa and cracks it for his Scrubland, to then cast Ashnod's Transmogrant, getting his Metalcraft online. He is now able to cast his Drannith Magistrate. A bit sad it wasn't fast enough to delay Urza though. He still attacks Rodrigo for 1 and passes. David gets to his turn, plays a Snow Island and casts a Mana Vault, triggering the Sentinel and paying for it. He then passes and on his end step Rodrigo cracks his Misty to find a Fetid Pulse and proceeds to his turn. He plays a Polluted Delta and cracks it for an Underground Sea, so he can cast Dothy Voidwalker, passing the turn. Sogan draws and casts a Mox Opal, triggering Sentinel and paying with his Mox Pearl. He then goes into combat and attacks Rodrigo for 4, as he is on Nods, and then he passes. Bal plays a Mana Confluence and casts a Professional Facebreaker, to then go into combat. He attacks David with Drannith and Rodrigo with the Sentinel, triggering Facebreaker for 2 treasures and ending his turn. David plays a Snow Island and just passes, hoping to sandbag into a removal for Drannith. Rodrigo plays an Underground River and casts a Mindblade Render, also passing. Sogan draws into another good one, a Rhystic Study, triggering Sentinel and paying for it. In response to it though, David fires a Shared Summons, triggering Sentinel and not paying for it. Rodrigo and Sogan pass, but Bal responds with an Archivist of Ogma. David then searches for a Spellseeker and a Gilded Drake to steal Drannith. Bal gains 1 life and draws a card, and Rhystic resolves. Sogan doesn't attack to have blockers for Facebreaker and then passes. Bal draws and jumps to combat. He attacks Rodrigo with Facebreaker and David with Ogma, triggering the Facebreaker for 2 treasures. In the second main phase, Bal casts Imperial Recruiter, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. It enters and Bal searches for a Dockside Extortionist, which he casts, triggering Rhystic but not paying for it this time. It enters and he creates 6 treasures, with 3 of those he casts Mayhem Devil, triggering Rhystic and not paying, as those 4 treasures would be enough to kill Urza. We're back to David. He just plays a snow-covered forest and considers his options thoroughly, ending up casting Sol Ring, triggering Rhystic and Sentinel and paying for both, passing the turn yet again. Rodrigo draws and goes into combat, attacking David for 1, triggering the Mindblade and drawing a card, ending his turn. Sogan gets to his turn and casts an Everflowing Chalice, X = 0, Sentinel triggers and he pays for it. He then slams down a Karn the Great Creator, and Bal responds to it by cracking a treasure to activate Facebreaker, triggering Mayhem Devil and pinging Urza with it. Bal reveals a Vampiri Tutor, which he casts still in response, triggering the Devil and Rhystic and paying for it, and the Devil hits Urza again twice. He then searches for an Unexpectedly Absent and still cracks a treasure for red, pinging Urza with the Devil, before Karn finally resolves. Sogan then activates it to transform Mox Opal into a creature, which dies to state-based actions. He plays a tapped Tolaria West and passes. Bal draws and jumps into combat, trying to figure a way to deal with Karn as he was expecting to loop Corpse Dance and win, if only it weren't for Rhystic Study and now Karn. He sends Mayhem Devil towards David, Imperial Recruiter towards Rodrigo and Facebreaker directly to Sogan's face, for 3 more treasures, and then he passes. David plays a Command Tower and is now afraid of an opposition agent from either black deck, so he keeps his Spellseeker to himself and just passes. In his end step, Rodrigo casts a Brainstorm, triggering Rhystic and Sentinel and paying for both, and then gets to his turn. He unfortunately didn't find any fetch, so he goes into combat attacking David with a Mindblade Render, triggering and drawing a card. He plays a Command Tower and still passes. Sogan is now a little bit behind with his Urza to take advantage of all those artifacts. He still adds another one to the bunch, a Tormod's Crypt, triggering Sentinel and paying for it, making Bal's plans even harder now. He then upticks Karn on one of Bal's treasures, which he cracks through the Facebreaker, triggering the Devil and killing David's Elvish Mystic. He then exiles a Gemstone Caverns. If it wasn't enough though, Sogan also casts a Torpor Orb and then passes the turn. Bal draws and plays a Sulphurous Springs, and then goes to combat attacking Karn with Facebreaker, David with Ogma and Rodrigo with Imperial Recruiter, creating 2 treasures. In his second main phase, he casts his commander, Jan Jensen, to hopefully have Karn in check. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. He then cracks his 4 treasures one by one through Facebreaker, triggering Mayhem Devil each time and pinging Karn each time, before ending his turn. David plays a Mana Confluence and just passes, as he is sadly flooding. In his end step though, Rodrigo flashes in a Notion Thief, triggering Rhystic and unable to pay. He gets to his turn and jumps into combat, as it has become of habit, attacking David with a Mindblade Render, triggering and drawing a card. He then plays in Urza Saga, entering and gaining its first ability. He then casts Nashi Moonsage Scion, triggering Rhystic, but due to the Notion Thief, Sogan won't ever draw from it. Sogan untaps, and in his upkeep, Bal activates Jan Jensen, sacrificing his Esper Sentinel to create 2 treasures, triggering Mayhem Devil and pinging Karn for good. He then draws and casts an Arcane Signet. Without a Karn to protect, he turns his construct sideways, hitting Bal for 8 damage and then passes. Bal draws and plays a Spectator Sitting, with which he casts a Skull Clamp. However, Rodrigo asks if this time Sogan would want to draw from Rhystic, making it so that Rodrigo draws instead, and as Bal did not pay for it, Sogan does decide to draw, so Rodrigo draws the card. Bal then cracks a treasure for white mana and pings Notion Thief with the Devil's Trigger. He now cracks Ashnod's Transmogrant, targeting Jan Jensen, and pings Dothy for 1 with the Devil. He cracks his other treasure for red mana and targets Dothy with his Devil's Trigger, and in response, Rodrigo sacrifices Dothy, choosing Vampiric Tutor to be able to cast it this turn, which hints that he might have a solution to Drannith at hand. This Dothy activation also triggers Mayhem Devil and Bal pings Rodrigo directly. Bal is now able to equip Skullclamp to Imperial Recruiter, killing it and drawing 2 cards. With the floating mana and the other one, he now casts a Demonic Tutor, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. He searches for a Grand Abolisher, hoping to eventually catch them off guard. He then goes to combat, attacking Rodrigo with Facebreaker and Ogma, Mayhem Devil towards Sogan and Dockside towards David. However, Rodrigo casts a Ground in the Lock on Bal's Facebreaker, so it doesn't create any more treasures. Damage connects and Bal passes. David finally decides to do some stuff, casting Tezzeret the Seeker, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. He then downticks him to search for a Mirage Mirror, which would help him filter colorless mana from Basalt as well as gain some value with it, copying other stuff until he unlocks himself from Drannith. We're back to Rodrigo. He draws and his Urza Saga gains its second ability. He then attacks David with the Render and Sogan with Nashi, triggering to draw a card and for everyone to exile the top card of their libraries. He then plays an Exotic Orchard and casts a Wishclaw Talisman, triggering and paying for the Rhystic trigger, ending his turn. Sogan is still looking for those polymorph effects, and is happy enough with his interaction, so he just plays a Snow Island and passes fully untapped. Bal draws and goes into combat right away, sending Mayhem Devil towards Rodrigo and Dockside towards Tezzeret, knowing it might just die, as David activates his Mirage Mirror to become a copy of Mayhem Devil, to then block the Dockside. Damage connects, and Rodrigo mentions they can now try to get rid of the Mirage Mirror, if Sogan decides to crack his Petal and Tormod's Crypt in response, which Sogan agrees, and cracks the Petal for blue. Bal pings the mirror and David pings Nashi. Then Sogan activates Tormod's Crypt to exile Bal's graveyard, and with the sacrifice trigger, Bal pings the Mirage Mirror and David pings Nashi. Both creatures die, but still in response to the Tormod's Crypt activation, Bal responds by casting a Silence, hoping to either bring out some interaction or to be able to resolve his Corpse Dance on his Dockside through a Jensen activation. Rhystic triggers and it doesn't pay, and as priority passes, Rodrigo asks if Sogan has something, since he only has one piece of interaction, and Sogan does respond with a Negate. With this twist of events, Bal's dreams of looping Dockside are gone for good, and in his second main phase he casts a Magda, triggering Rhystic and not paying for it before passing. David wasn't expecting Tezzeret to survive the turn cycle, but this way he takes advantage of it, floating mana with his rocks and untapping them with his +1 ability. He then casts his Gilded Drake knowing it won't do anything with Torpor Orb, and pays for the Rhystic trigger. This way he got himself a blocker and he passes. Rodrigo draws and his Urza Saga gains its third ability and he taps it for mana in response. He finds a Sol Ring, and Bal pings Tezzeret with Mayhem Devil trigger and gains 1 life and draws a card due to Ogma's trigger. Rodrigo does some math and fires a Dark Ritual, triggering Rhystic and not paying. He sandbagged enough and hopes to go for it, hard casting Hullbreaker Horror, triggering Rhystic and not paying. He then plays a Forbidden Orchard and uses the last floating mana he had to activate Wishclaw Talisman. In response, however, Bal casts his Unexpectedly Absent on the Hullbreaker Horror, triggering Rhystic and not paying, but in response to the trigger, Rodrigo casts a Mana Drain on the Absent, triggering Hullbreaker to bounce Rhystic and paying for the Rhystic trigger. In response though, Sogan responds with a Flusterstorm, helping to save the table, and then he draws from Rhystic. Hullbreaker Horror is put on top of Rodrigo's library and Rodrigo searches for a Cyclonic Rift, hoping to reset this crazy board. David gets the Wishclaw Talisman, Bal gains 1 life and draws 1 card with Ogma, and we're back to Sogan's turn. He casts a Sapphire Medallion and follows it with a Snap targeting Ogma and then tapping 2 lands. This way, with the floating mana, he casts Hullbreaker Horror himself. He now casts his own Baby Rift targeting Magda, triggering the Horror to bounce his Mox Opal, which he recasts right away, triggering the Horror to bounce his Everflowing Chalice back to his hand. However, the other blue deck also sandbagged a lot, and David responds with a Pact of Negation on Mox Opal, and Sogan unfortunately had no response, so with this he is forced to pass. Bal draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs that he cracks triggering the Devil and pinging Tezzeret. He searches for a Badlands and then recasts his Magda followed by a Jewel Lotus to have more Devil triggers if needed. He still casts Liquid Metal Coating and attacks Rodrigo for 3 before passing. On his end step still, David casts a Drowning Dreams x = 7, choosing the mode to draw 7 cards. He gets to his turn and taps and pays for the Pact trigger. He draws and takes 1 from the Mana Vault. He plays an Exotic Orchard and then casts a Gitaxian Probe targeting Sogan, and sees quite some interesting interaction which makes things harder for his current plans. He then activates Wishclaw Talisman and Bal responds by flashing his Ogma. David finds a Resculpt to his hand. Rodrigo gains control over the Talisman and Bal gains 1 life and draws a card. David then casts a Fellwar Stone and passes. Rodrigo gets to his turn and casts a Toxic Deluge, paying a whopping 8 life to get rid of the second Horror from this table. In response, Bal activates Liquid Metal Coating, targeting his spirit to become an artifact and still activate Jan Jansen, sacrificing the artifact spirit to create 2 treasures and pinging Rodrigo directly with the Devil trigger. Rodrigo then plays a Blast Zone and finally casts his commander on turn 9, Tasha the Witch Queen, which he upticks, drawing a card and exiling an instant or sorcery from each of his opponent's graveyards. He passes and we're back to Sogan. He plays a Snow Island and pays 5 for his Urza, which now doesn't create a construct, but is still a valid target for his polymorphing shenanigans. He casts Everflowing Chalice for 0 and passes. Bal draws and casts his Corpse Dance on his Mayhem Devil, which he had left on top of his graveyard. He now recasts his Jan Jansen, sacrificing his 2 treasures and Jewel Lotus, pinging Urza for 3 with the Devil. He now casts Grinding Station and then activates Liquid Metal Coating on one of his tapped lands to become an artifact, so he can sacrifice it through Jan Jansen to create 2 constructs and ping Urza to death with the Devil trigger. He then equips one of the constructs with Skull Clamp, killing it and drawing 2 cards, and he finds a Blood Crypt which he plays untapped, paying 2 life, and then he clamps the other construct for 2 more cards, eventually forgetting to attack as he passes the turn. In his end step though, David fires his Resculpt, thoroughly thinking on the target, and it is Sapphire Medallion, as he knows it is allowing Sogan to have Tail's End and Narset's Reversal online with it. Sogan lets it resolve and we are on David's turn now. Note that everyone forgot that Mayhem Devil should be exiled at the end step, but thankfully this didn't affect the outcome of the game in a major way, as you will soon see. He draws and takes 1 from the Mana Vault. He plays a Treasure Vault and then casts Kinnan, somewhat hoping to bait Sogan into casting his Tail's End. But Sogan keeps his finger steady on the trigger. David then casts a Solve the Equation, as this one can bait the Narset's Reversal. The table now understands Sogan is tight on options, so Bal at least activates Grinding Station, sacrificing his Skull Clamp targeting David, in hopes of milling whatever he was aiming to tutor for, but he hits nothing. They considered Mayhem Devil to trigger and pointed at Kinnan. David now successfully searches for a Flusterstorm, and then casts an Isochron Scepter, triggering it to imprint as well as Grinding Station to untap. and in response to it, Ball activates the station, sacrificing Liquid Metal Coating to mill the Vid for 3 and still considering Mayhem Devil to be in play, pinging Keenan one second time. Now, with the 3 mana, Sogan responds with the Tail's End on Imprint trigger, but the Vid responds to it with the tutored Fluster Storm, sealing the deal as he imprints Dramatic Reversal. He is now able to produce infinite Simic mana through the activation of Isochron Scepter, untapping his 2 rocks. And with it, he recasts Keenan and activates them enough times to find Thrasius and some other creatures, so he can then draw into Finale of Devastation and kill the table through combat. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Drannith Magistrate took a toll mostly on the Vid's deck, as well as Rodrigo disabling his Dauthi Voidwalker and Nashi. Karn and the other Urza's Hate Rocks slowed Ball enough not to win, but Mayhem Devil still played a major role in policing the table. Eventually, each player tried to win, Rodrigo and Sogan with the Codfish, until most interaction was used, and the Vid found a window for the win through that Gitaxian Probe. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rapp, Mike Purr, Ajimo, Drunken House Cat, V, RJ, Heated Chill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katerina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt, Wicked, and Zinan, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing, or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.